Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something quite fundamental. The idea of knowing yourself.
hmm
Not just, for self-help, but as a way to understand something much bigger, this concept of the oneness of being.
Right. It's this idea that if you look deep enough inside, you actually find, well, the key to reality itself. It pops up in so many different traditions.
Exactly. And we're using a fascinating little book as our guide.
Yeah.
Simply called Know Yourself.
Simple title, but yeah, fascinating book.
And there's a bit of a mystery surrounding it, isn't there? For ages, people thought it was by Ibn Arabi, a huge figure in the 13th century.
A giant, yeah. But more recent scholars are leaning towards someone else, Ahwad al-Din Balyani, a contemporary.
Which is interesting in itself, the fact there's still discussion after, 7th century?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the sheer number of copies, manuscripts found everywhere, it tells you something about its impact. People kept reading it, kept copying it.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to sort of unpack what this book is saying. What does it mean, really, to know yourself, according to this text? And how does that connect to this unified reality? It's a perspective that can really challenge how you see things.
Definitely. And we're lucky to have this translation by Cecilia Twinch. She looked at a whole bunch of manuscripts from the UK, Turkey, Syria.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and her goal was accessibility, to open it up even if you don't know Arabic or the deep historical context.
Which is great. And the books had other names too, right? Like Treatise on Unity.
Treatise on Unity, sometimes the Book of Aleph.
Mm-hmm.
But the real core, the thing that keeps coming up is that saying from the Prophet Muhammad, whoever knows their self knows their Lord.
That feels like the engine behind it all.
It really is.
Okay, so let's dig into that authorship question a bit. Ibn Arabi, why was he the first suspect, so to speak? What made him such a major figure?
Well, Ibn Arabi, living 1165 to 1240, he was just immense. Born in Spain, traveled everywhere, wrote so much, something like over 300 books attributed to him, maybe 93 or so still exist.
Wow.
And he's famous for his teachings on Wadat al-Wujud, the oneness of being. He saw the world as this constant unfolding, like a divine self-expression, always new.
Okay.
And he believed humans have this unique capacity to mirror that reality, to reflect it perfectly.
A true heavyweight.
Yeah.
So what about the other candidate, Awad al-Din Balyani? Maybe less of a household name?
Yeah, less famous, definitely. He died a bit later, 1287, a Sufi sheikh from Shiraz in Persia. We don't have tons of biographical detail, actually. A lot comes from a later writer, Jami, in the 15th century.
Right.
But yeah, the scholarly thinking now often points to Balyani as the likely author of this particular text.
And what sort of intellectual world was he part of? Who influenced him?
He was definitely plugged into the Sufi networks, traced his lineage back to figures like Abu Ali Dakwak, Abu Najib al-Suwardi, important names. And there's also this interesting link to Ibn Sabin, another Sufi thinker who, like Ibn Arabi, actually had Andalusian roots. So you see these connections, these ideas moving between Persia and Spain.
That's fascinating, the cross-pollination of ideas. Now, you mentioned a potential difference in focus between Ibn Arabi and Balyani.
Yes, it's a subtle but maybe important distinction. Ibn Arabi often focuses on the world as God's self-expression, its reality as manifestation.
Okay.
Whereas Balyani and Ibn Sabin too maybe put a bit more emphasis on the illusory nature of the world as we normally perceive it, its lack of independent reality.
Ah, I see.
And that difference, that emphasis on the world being sort of less real in itself might fit better with some of the arguments in Know Yourself. It's another clue, perhaps.
Okay, that's really helpful context.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the book itself now, setting aside the who wrote it question for a moment. This core idea, the oneness of being, what's it actually saying?
Fundamentally, it's stating that there's only one true existence, one ultimate reality, and that's God, period. It puts it very starkly. He is, and there is not with him any before or after manifested existence or place. And he is now as he has always been.
Wow, that's absolutely.
It is. It really lays the groundwork. The implication is that our everyday sense of being a separate self is ultimately limited. It's a partial view.
So if there's only God, what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
For ourself?
Right. And this is key. The book redefines self, the Arabic word nafs. It's not talking about your ego or your personality quirks or the blaming self you sometimes hear.
Not the everyday self.
No. It defines nafs here as your fundamental being and your essential reality. That's the self the prophet's saying refers to, the self you need to know God. It's like getting to the very root of what you are.
Okay, so peeling back layers to find this essential reality, which then leads to that really striking statement, you are not you, but you are him, and there is no you. That sounds, well, pretty extreme.
It does, and it's so easy to misunderstand. It's crucial to get that it's not saying you physically become God or that God takes over your body, like incarnation. Not at all.
Right. It's not literal merging.
No. It's pointing to recognizing that fundamental unity we just talked about. The book gives this analogy. Imagine someone called Mahmud thinks his name is Muhammad.
Okay.
When he finds out he's actually Mahmud, Muhammad doesn't get destroyed or annihilated. He just realizes the truth of who he always was. The mistaken identity falls away.
So it's about realization, not transformation.
Yeah.
A shift in understanding.
Exactly. It's about seeing what's already true, not becoming something different.
Now, Sufism often talks about fana, right?
Yeah.
Passing away, annihilation of the self.
Yeah.
How does this book view that?
Yeah, it addresses fauna. And interestingly, it offers a kind of critique of how it's often understood. The traditional idea is the self passes away in God, and then even that passing away passes away. But this book argues, well, if you talk about something passing away, you're kind of implying it existed independently in the first place, right? Something other than God that needs to disappear.
I see the problem.
Yeah. The text says, look, things don't have that independent existence to begin with, so there's nothing really there to be annihilated. It's more like realizing the flame was never separate from the potential for fire.
That's a really key point. Not destroying something, but seeing its lack of separate reality. The book also talks about eternity, timelessness.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
It says things like, now is eternity without beginning, and now is eternity without end, and now is timelessness.
Okay.
The idea is that God's being is this timeless, eternal now. And if you imagine something else existing independently alongside God, an associate, that messes up the whole concept, an independent being wouldn't rely on God, which leads you down a logical dead end.
Right, it breaks the unity. It all has to come back to that one source. And this changes how you see everything, doesn't it? It says, whoever sees anything with God has also made that thing an associate.
Precisely. It's about shifting perception. Instead of seeing God in the tree or God in me, the goal is to see the tree as him, myself as him, as manifestations of the one reality. If you see something as truly separate, you've created a duality where the book says there's only unity, like seeing waves and the ocean instead of seeing the waves as the ocean.
Okay. And what about that phrase, his veil is his oneness? That sounds like a riddle.
It does, yeah. It's a powerful one, though. What it's getting at is that there isn't some thing, some curtain or barrier separate from God that hides him. The only veil is God's own absolute singular nature. His very oneness is what makes him incomprehensible to our usual way of perceiving things, which relies on distinction and separation.
So the veil isn't external. It's inherent in his nature.
Exactly. It's without any condition, the text says. It's just how reality is. Our limited minds, used to seeing separate objects, struggle to grasp that totality. The vastness itself is the veil.
The book also makes this really strong statement about the prophet Muhammad. His prophet is he, his messenger is he, his message is he, and his word is he.
Very strong, yes. It hammers home that absolute unity again. It's saying God sends himself from himself to himself. There are no intermediaries at that ultimate level. The prophet, the message, they are expressions of God's reality made accessible.
No separation between sender, message, receiver.
At that fundamental level, no.
Okay, so let's loop back to the core theme. Whoever knows their self knows their Lord. How does the book ultimately connect knowing this essential self with knowing God?
It says that when you truly know yourself, your essential being, that nax we talked about, you realize that this being isn't separate from God's being. It is God's being.
Okay.
Not because you changed or God moved into you, but because that's the fundamental truth that was always there, just hidden by your ignorance, by your belief in separateness, like realizing the wave is water.
And this applies to our attributes too. Seeing his attributes as your attribute.
Yeah. Exactly. Your existence, your qualities are reflections or manifestations of his. Not that you become God or God becomes you in some crude way. It's like the image in the mirror, totally dependent on the source, reflecting its qualities, but not the source itself.
It's a relationship of manifestation.
Precisely.
The book mentions that Quranic verse, everything passes away except his face. How does that fit this oneness interpretation?
In this context, it means that nothing has truly independent, lasting existence except God. Everything else we perceive as solid and enduring is ultimately transient because it doesn't have that fundamental reality in itself. Only God's face, his essence, truly is.
And the effect of gaining this knowledge, this self-realization, it uses that analogy about learning your name.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. If you didn't know your name and then someone told you, your actual being wouldn't change at all. but your ignorance about yourself would vanish. So self-knowledge here is the disappearance of the illusion of separation. It's not about becoming nothing. It's about realizing the truth of what you fundamentally are, waking up from the dream of separateness.
It sounds incredibly deep, but also maybe easy to get wrong. There's that warning story, the student and the snake.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway there?
Oh, that story is vital. It's the reality check. The student hears there is nothing but God, gets intellectually fired up and thinks, okay, the snake is just God, and goes to grab it.
And gets bitten, presumably.
Gets bitten. And the sheikh basically says, look, even if you understand the ultimate truth is oneness, that doesn't mean you discard common sense, discernment, or your basic obligations in the world.
Right.
You still need to recognize danger, act wisely. This high-level understanding isn't a free pass for recklessness. It highlights the need for guidance, for practical wisdom alongside the metaphysics.
So it's not about ignoring the apparent reality we live in. Now, there seems to be this tension. The book stresses oneness, no separation, but then talks about knowing God, which sort of implies two things, a knower and a known. How does it handle that?
It tackles it head-on. It says, ultimately, there is neither union nor separation,
Okay.
because union requires two separate things to unite. If there's only one fundamental reality, the concept of union doesn't even apply, same for closeness or distance. Those feelings might arise when you're unaware of the oneness, but the realization itself isn't about achieving union, it's about recognizing it was always the case.
So the realization dissolves the very basis for concepts like union or separation.
Exactly. They become meaningless in the face of that ultimate non-duality.
And this applies to knowing itself. The knower and the known are one.
Yes. At that ultimate level, the one who knows, your essential self, and the object of knowledge, God, aren't two separate entities. They are one and the same reality, just like the seer and the seen, the finder and the found.
It collapses all those dualities.
It does.
The text also encourages going beyond intellect, understanding by the light of unveiling. What's that saying about just thinking our way to this?
It's suggesting that while thinking and philosophy can prepare the ground, they have limits in grasping this ultimate reality. True realization, it implies, comes through a more direct, intuitive experience and unveiling kosh within yourself. It's a different kind of knowing beyond just logic and reason, more like direct perception.
And then there's that really profound statement, the Sufi is uncreated after this unveiling. What could that possibly mean?
Yeah, that's deep territory. It points toward the state of realization so complete that the individual transcends the sense of being a created entity within time. They recognize their essence as rooted in the internal, unconditioned reality that precedes creation itself.
Wow.
But the book immediately adds a caution, right? It says this understanding might not be for everyone, especially those whose minds are still primarily operating within the framework of the created world, the two worlds.
So it's an advanced realization, needing maturity.
Very much so. It concludes by bringing all these threads together. Seer seen, creator created, perceiver perceived, they are all one. God knowing himself through himself. And it even tackles a potential objection from the Quran, the verse, eyes do not perceive him.
How does it handle that?
It argues that the verse actually supports its point. If there's no true other to perceive God as separate, then of course eyes, belonging to that illusory other, cannot perceive him. The perception is God perceiving himself.
Ah, it flips the interpretation.
Exactly. And finally, it underlines the importance of guidance. While we can talk about this, understand it intellectually, the text suggests that reaching that state of unveiling often requires a real guide, an eminent master, a wise teacher.
Someone who's walked the path.
Precisely.
So wrapping this up, this journey into know yourself offers this really radical view. Knowing your deepest self is knowing the ultimate reality, because fundamentally there's only one.
Yeah.
The separation we feel is, well, ignorance.
Yeah, the core message hits home. You yourself are the object of your quest. It's an invitation to look within, not to find a small separate self, but to potentially recognize your intrinsic connection to everything.
It really leaves you with a lot to think about. How does even considering this perspective change how you see yourself or others or just the world day to day? What questions does it spark for you personally?
It's a dense little book with huge implications, definitely a starting point. And for anyone wanting to go deeper, exploring the text further, or digging into Ibn Arabi or learning more about Balyani, there's certainly a vast ocean there.
A profound challenge to our everyday assumptions. Thank you for unpacking that with me.
My pleasure. It's fascinating stuff.
Indeed. Well, that's all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.